The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It poured relentlessly over the trenches, filling the earth with mud, drowning the cries of the wounded, and muffling the footsteps of the men who had already grown numb to the stench of death. Private Thomas Harris wiped his rifle with a torn piece of cloth, though he knew it would make little difference. The mud and the moisture would creep back in by dawn. Beside him, Sergeant Edward Collins lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the rain with his palm. "Tomorrow," Collins muttered, his voice cracked from smoke and exhaustion, "they say we go over the top again." Thomas said nothing. He had stopped responding to such news. Orders came every day, and every day men climbed out of the trenches into the storm of bullets, and every day most of them never returned. He thought of his home, a village in the countryside, where the air was sweet and filled with the fragrance of wheat fields. His mother would be waking before dawn to tend the livestock. His younger brother, barely 15, would probably be dreaming of becoming a soldier himself, imagining glory in war. Thomas wished he could tell him the truth, that there was no glory, only mud, fear, and the endless struggle to stay alive for one more night. The whistle blew at dawn. The world erupted. Artillery shells screamed across the gray sky, exploding in thunderous bursts that shook the very ground. The men scrambled, clutching rifles, bayonets fixed, hands trembling despite all the bravado. "Up, up!" Sergeant Collins shouted, pushing Thomas forward. Thomas's boots slipped in the mud as he hoisted himself over the trench wall. Ahead stretched a barren wasteland of broken trees, barbed wire, and craters filled with water and blood. Machine guns rattled in the distance, sending death slicing through the fog. He ran. He did not look left or right. The man beside him screamed and fell, clutching his stomach. Another dropped with half his face gone. Thomas kept running.
To stop was to die.
The enemy was dug in at the ridge, firing relentlessly. The whistle of bullets was everywhere. Thomas felt the sting of shrapnel graze his arm, warm blood soaking his sleeve. He stumbled, fell into a crater, gasping for breath. Inside the crater, a soldier from the enemy's side lay wounded, his chest rising and falling shallowly. The man's eyes met Thomas's, eyes full of terror, not hate. He was young, no older than Thomas himself. In his hand, he clutched a photograph of a woman and a baby. Thomas froze. For a moment, the battlefield disappeared. There was only the sound of rain, the trembling breath of the dying man, and the photograph. He could finish him, one pull of the trigger. That was what he had been trained to do. But he couldn't. His finger refused to move. The man coughed, whispered something in his own tongue, and then went still. The photograph slipped from his hand into the mud. Thomas sat there, numb, until Collins's voice roared from above. "Harris, move." He scrambled out of the crater, heart pounding with something heavier than fear. That night, back in the trench, Thomas Harris found no rest. The rain still fell in thin, icy threads, soaking into the canvas roof of the dugout, dripping steadily from the edges like the ticking of some merciless clock. The trench smelled of wet earth, unwashed bodies, and smoke that never seemed to clear. The men lay huddled under their blankets, some snoring faintly, others murmuring in uneasy dreams, but for Thomas there was no escape. His mind replayed the moment in the crater again and again, the wounded enemy soldier, the trembling breath, the photograph half buried in mud. Every time Thomas closed his eyes, he saw them, the boy's eyes staring at him, wide with terror, not hatred. They were the eyes of someone who wanted to live, who might have had a mother waiting at home, a wife, perhaps even a baby he had barely held in his arms. The photograph had shown a woman with soft eyes and a child no older than 2, both smiling in some sunlit garden far away from the mud and thunder of the front. The image had cut through Thomas like shrapnel, sharper than any bullet. He rubbed his face with shaking hands, smearing mud across his cheeks. He wanted to forget, but forgetting was impossible. From the darkness beside him, a spark flared. Sergeant Edward Collins had lit another cigarette, shielding the flame carefully with his cupped hands. The glow briefly illuminated his scarred face, the lines carved deep from years of soldiering. Collins had noticed Thomas's restlessness. He always noticed. "You froze today," Collins said flatly, exhaling a stream of smoke into the damp night. His tone was not one of accusation, nor comfort. It was the voice of a man simply stating a fact. Thomas's throat tightened. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice low and raw. "He was just a boy. Like me." Collins shifted slightly, resting his back against the slick wooden planks that kept the trench from collapsing. He took a long drag, the end of his cigarette glowing like a tiny ember of defiance in the darkness. "And if you hadn't killed him," he said, his voice rough from smoke and years of shouting over artillery, "he'd have killed you. That's war, Harris." Thomas shook his head, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "But he didn't. He didn't try to kill me. He just looked at me. And then he was gone." His voice cracked at the last word, almost a whisper drowned by the patter of rain. Collins turned his head slowly, studying the younger man through the gloom. His eyes, shadowed but sharp, softened slightly, not with pity, but with the weariness of a man who had seen the same doubts before. He flicked ash into the mud. "Listen, Harris," he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of the usual bark of command. "War doesn't care about your heart. Out there, mercy gets you killed. You have to bury it, or it will bury you." The words hung heavy between them, heavier than the mist, heavier than the mud clinging to their boots. Thomas stared down at his hands, calloused and trembling, stained with grime and blood that no amount of scrubbing could ever seem to wash away. He wanted to believe Collins, that survival depended on killing without hesitation, that hesitation was weakness. It was what every officer drilled into them, what every charge across no man's land demanded. And yet he couldn't. He could still feel the boy's gaze like a weight pressing on his chest, see the photograph sinking slowly into the mud as though the earth itself wanted to swallow the memory of a life that had been lost. He thought of his younger brother back home, full of dreams about becoming a soldier. Would his brother's photograph one day end up in the dirt, held in the stiff fingers of a corpse? The trench creaked as Collins shifted again, pulling his greatcoat tighter against the cold. "You'll learn," he muttered, though his tone was not unkind. "The first time always haunts you. The second less so. After enough, you stop feeling it altogether." Thomas looked up sharply at that, his heart thudding. To stop feeling, was that survival, or was that the death of something deeper than the body? He wondered if Collins, with all his scars and smoke-stained breath, had already buried whatever heart he once had. The silence stretched. Somewhere down the line, a man coughed violently in his sleep. From the distance came the dull boom of artillery, never truly resting, like a storm that refused to move on. Thomas didn't reply. He couldn't. He knew Collins was right in a way, but deep down something inside him had shifted, something that would not bend so easily to the demands of war. He could not bury the man's face, or the photograph, no matter how hard he tried. And as the night dragged on, while the others slept, Thomas sat awake in the trench with the rain dripping endlessly around him, wrestling with the truth he dared not speak aloud, that maybe mercy did not belong in war, but without it, he would no longer know who he was. Days turned into weeks. The battle raged on. The line barely moved, men died for inches of ground. One evening, as the sky glowed red with the setting sun, the mail arrived. Thomas received a letter from his mother. "My dear Thomas," it began, "we pray for you every day. Your brother has started working in the fields. He says he wants to be strong like you, to fight like you. But I pray he never sees what you see. Come back to us, my son. That is all I ask." Thomas folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling. How could he tell his mother that he was not strong? That every day he questioned why he was here, killing boys who carried photographs of their families? That night he wrote back, "Dearest mother, I am alive. That is all I can say. Tell my brother there is no strength in killing, only survival. If he wishes to be like me, tell him to stay by your side, not to follow me into this madness." He sealed the letter with mud-stained hands, praying it would reach home. 2 weeks later, the The largest assault yet began. The sky was blackened by smoke, the ground trembling under constant bombardment. The men charged again, wave after wave, into the storm of bullets. Thomas fought like a man possessed. He fired until his rifle was hot, bayonet an enemy soldier who came too close, crawled through the mud with blood in his eyes. Around him, men screamed, men fell, men vanished in explosions that tore the earth apart. And then, amidst the chaos, he found himself face to face with another enemy soldier. They both raised their rifles at the same time, both hesitated. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The enemy lowered his rifle first. He was shaking, terrified, just a boy like the one before. Thomas exhaled, lowering his weapon too. In that moment, both understood they were the same. Not enemies, just pawns. But before anything more could happen, Collins appeared behind Thomas and shot the boy in the chest. The boy dropped instantly, his eyes wide with betrayal. Thomas spun on Collins. "Why?" he shouted. Collins's face was hard. "Because he wouldn't have spared you." Thomas stared at the body, at the lifeless eyes staring into nothing. Something inside him cracked. He realized then that the war was not just killing men, it was killing their souls. Months passed. The war dragged on, an endless cycle of attack and retreat. The men grew thinner, quieter, emptier. One night, Thomas overheard officers talking. There would be a final push at dawn, a suicidal charge meant to break the stalemate. He knew what it meant. Most of them would not live to see another sunrise. As the men slept in exhaustion, Thomas sat awake, staring at the stars beyond the smoke. He thought of his mother, his brother, the faces of the boys he had spared and those he hadn't. He made a decision. At dawn, when the whistle blew, Thomas did not climb out of the trench. Instead, he dropped his rifle, raised his hands, and stepped into no man's land. The guns paused. Both sides watched in disbelief. He kept walking, unarmed, his hands high. Bullets could have ended him any second, but they didn't. Soldiers on both sides stared, confused, as if waiting for someone else to act. Finally, one shot rang out, not from the enemy but from behind. Collins stood in the trench, rifle smoking, eyes blazing with fury and sorrow. Thomas fell to his knees, blood spreading across his chest. Yet he smiled, because in that moment, in his defiance, he felt free. The war ended months later, not with glory, but with exhaustion. Fields once green were nothing but mud and graves. In a small village, Thomas's mother received a letter. It said only that her son had died with honor. She wept, clutching his last letter to her chest. But somewhere, on a forgotten battlefield, flowers grew in the crater where Thomas had once walked with empty hands. And in the silence of that place, perhaps the echoes of his choice still lingered, the choice to see humanity, even in the heart of war.